This video is not intended for anyone 13 or younger. Hello viewers, and welcome to a new segment of our show that we're trying out. We're going to be reading through Magic the Gathering's newest story through Strixhaven. And today we're tackling the first episode of the main story. So I hope you all enjoy a good read. And let me know in the comments if I should keep doing more of these stories in chapters. So let me know down in the comments below, and let us kick back and enjoy as I read the first chapter of Strixhaven of Class is Now in Session. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It only takes 2 simple clicks. Click, click. Enjoy the episode. In the seamlessly endless halls of Bilboplex, where arcane knowledge from countless worlds lined shelves that had seen the rise and fall of empires, it seemed as though the only sound on the whole plane of Archytos was the click of heel on stone. Professor Onyx, Professor Onyx, as she was known here, took a deep breath as she walked, inhaling the small smell of old paper and the familiar ozone that always seemed to accompany magic. She needed a break from yet another insufferable meeting. For all the wisdom and learning in this place, it was populated with some remarkably thick-headed individuals. Case in point, despite her considerable renown through the multiverse, the other professors of Strixhaven hadn't recognized Liliana Fess when she introduced herself by an entirely different name. That hasn't surprised her. The school had always been that way, ever since she's been a student so many years ago, always wrapped up in its own little problems. There was something calming about the weight of all the books, tomes, and scrolls around her. They seemed to warp the place in a kind of hush. When the students arrived, the campus wouldn't be nearly so quiet, but for the moment she savored the sense of solitude as she wandered the stacks. A rustling sound from up ahead with the twine of annoyance. Liliana pictured that perspectively chattering codex. It most likely would be coming around the corner any minute now. As she rounded the next bend through, it wasn't the school magically animated books she saw in the stacks. "What are you doing?" she said. A figure froze, their hands still reaching for another book to add to the pile at their feet. Liliana stepped forward. "Students aren't to arrive for another—" The words fell away as she streak and purplish light flew from the figure's hand. It grazed her arm, and the room suddenly seemed to buckle and sway as the sickening sensation spread throughout her body. With the gesture of will, she isolated the spell's effects, and then squashed it. An amateur's work, yes, but none of the 5 colleges of Strixhaven taught magic of that nature. "So," she said, a swirling current of deathly energy weathering her hand as she called up her own magic. "You're not just here for the summer lessons, I take it." The figure was masked. She could see now. The space where the eyes should be were covered only with smooth, flat metal. She heard of the quill, of course. The school was full of concentrated whispers about the secret society of mages, the ones obsessed with forbidden magic and magics and power at any cost. She hasn't expected to see one so soon, though. "I know what you are," she said. The intruder looked towards the hall and then back at Liliana. "Then you know that your days are numbered." Professor Onyx? A vaguely familiar voice called from one of the nearby halls. Liliana spun in the direction of the sound. Spell charge, hand raised. Dean Sinine Talonrook stood at the end of the hall, frowning. Are you alright? When she turned back, the intruder was gone. Only the pile of books and scrolls on the floor showed that they had been there. Liliana collected herself, letting the magic dissipate. This was no time to draw more attention to herself. Yes, I just thought I saw something in the stacks. Have the facility moved on to the next topic at hand? Dean clicked her beak, her huge dark eyes filled with annoyance. Dean is insisting on lengthening this year's season of Mage Tower. Liliana frowned as she touched her arm where the spell had grazed her. Following Dean back towards the Hall of Oracles, she glanced towards the books. Surely we have bigger problems than Magic Tower. Quite right, crowned Dean. Liliana hardly heard anything else she said. In his chambers, William Kenrith, in his chambers in Kellium, Will Kenrith started helplessly at the towering stacks of books on his bed. He's been trying to choose which one to bring with him. At first, it seemed certain that the tome regarding molten prophecy was the best bet, but then he had remembered his favorite historical text, according to Thaddeus the Healer. It was now an hour later, and he was no closer to deciding. He ran a hand through his short blond hair, glanced around the room, his eye catching on the glowing owl-shaped card on the table, before he shook his head. There was no way to know how long it would be before they returned to Kellium, if they ever did. The front door banged open, making Will flinch, and Rowan Kenrith stuttered inside. Will's sister was just as tall as him, golden hair flowing down the red cape thrown over her shoulder. She frowned at Will, her gaze flickering to the books still spread out in front of him. How are you still not ready? Just give me a minute, he said. The molten prophecy. Definitely the molten prophecy. Rowan picked up the invitation from the table across the room. Golden sparks floated up from them, the owl-shaped card glowing slightly in her hand. You had 2 weeks, Will. We need to get going, says Rowan. Rowan picked up her invitation from the table across the room. Oh wait, no, sorry. The histories say Strixhaven has existed there for millennia, and I'm sure it can wait a few more minutes for us. He glanced back at the stack. How could he make do without the accounting of Thanos, or probably hours? Rowan groaned. Charisma is probably waiting on us right now. Will sighed. Charisma. The woman had told them plenty about all things that Strixhaven has to offer, but her invitation had come out of nowhere, arriving only a few days after Gurik had been satisfied enough in their security to leave them on their own. They hadn't spent that much time with her on Calum. Yet now they were supposed to go to an entirely new world on her word alone. Will turned back to his books. I'm sure she'll be fine. We are leaving. Yes, I know. Today, certainly. I just need to. No, Will, Rowan crumbled. the invitation in her hand. No! Will started to speak, but the light burst through the room, tendrils of shadow swirling through the air. He squished against it as it spread out to surround his sister. Behind her! Specks of bright blue sky shroud a web of vinous green leaves. Rowan grinned and waved as she stepped into the light and disappeared. Will clenched his jaw, fighting the pull at his core, but his connection to his sister was too strong. Soon the same tendrils of light and shadow erupted from him, washing the bed in its eternal glow. Despitely, he grabbed the memoirs of Tharos, the healer, before the light could pull him to a new plane. All around him, then, was a light and color and sound unlike any of Kalium. He was hurtling through nothing, through everywhere, everything. The first thing Will heard, whenever Rowan had taken them, was a high-pitched screech. It was coming from a blur of feathers and talons. The blur was headed right for him. Will yelped, raising the memoirs as a shield. The bird caught up into the air just before impact, whirling in a wide arc overhead. They were in a clearing surrounded by dwarfish, gentle-looking trees. At the edge of it stood a familiar figure carving a crooked staff. After a moment, the bird dropped out of the sky and landed on the woman's shoulder. "Hello, Will and Rowan." A spear of sunlight shone over her, setting her red hair alight. Charisma gave something for a small smile, nodding to him. "I see you both made it, and just in time. Classes will be starting soon." Will looked around. He couldn't see anything but wilderness. "So, the school's nearby then?" "That's right." Charisma turned and stepped towards the edge of the clearing, just beyond the forest. "We'll see the first torch soon." First torch, Will wondered. What could mean? "So, what's this place like?" asked Rowan, breaking from Will's side to follow her. "Are there others like us? People who could move between worlds?" "It's a very large campus," Charisma said. "I'm sure there are others from different planes. Are you coming, Will?" Will clenched his jaw and then marched along behind them. There was, as Charisma had said, a torch. What she hadn't said was it was that it was massive, more like a tower, really. The silver column rose high above the trees, piercing the brilliant blue sky. Even from the ground, Will could see the dancing flame at the top of the structure, its light radiating that of the two suns that stove stove shone above it. As they reached the base, Will brushed a hand against the smooth metal. "How do they keep this thing alight?" "Like most things on Arctos," Charisma said, "with magic." Will glanced at the woman, annoyed. "Is this your homeworld?" "I have been with the university for a long time, but no." Charisma looked towards the horizon. "The next torch should be that way." Will looked in the same direction, but all he could see were green fields stretched out before them, broken only by a foot-worn path. If there are more torches, you have time to admire them later, Will." "Come on," said Rowan, running ahead. "Rowan, slow down," says Will. "We don't know who or what could be out there." "Exactly," she said, laughing. They walked for a few miles before they reached the next torch. Will wondered how many of them there were across this plain, and what other strange lands they might tower over. The Stormright texts were a lot more, though, Charisma says. ideally. Will stared at Charisma's nearness. He frowned, then followed her gaze into the book at his side. He slid his hand over it, the worn cover giving him the sense of security. I haven't heard of that one. Well, you can always consult it at the Bilbaplex once we reach Strixhaven. The what? Rowan asked. The Bilboplex, Charisma replied. Home to the most extensive collection of knowledge regarding magic on any plane, anywhere. Oh, Rowan said, not bothering to hide her disappointment. More books. Who cares? Are you joking? Exclaimed Well, we could learn everything. Anything. We got to pick up the pace. Rowan rolled her eyes. Now, who needs to slow down, Didn't you say there could be beasties out there? My owl would alert me to any approaching danger, said Charisma. Neither of you have anything to fear. Will glanced at the bird. He flexed its white wings as the light of the suns bounced off its rolling eyes in halting motion. It turned its head, looked directly at him. Will frowned. What's wrong with it? Charisma looked ahead. Nothing at all. Though she is getting a bit long in the tooth. They walked the rest of the way in silence, with Will sneaking glances at the owl and her owner. But the bird always seemed to know when he was looking, and stared right back at until Will couldn't keep himself from looking away. He noticed the changing landscape as they moved, spotting a range of reddish-gray mountains in the distance. Finally, Charisma broke the silence as they passed another torch. Welcome to Strixhaven. As the trio caressed the ridge, Will almost fell onto his face as the sight before him. The campus stretched across the horizon, an intricate tangle of gleaming towers and flattening rooftops. A massive arc of jagged stone floated over what must have been the center of the institution, the ends of each stone pointing towards the ground, smooth and flat, as if a giant's blade had shed away the bottoms. Will stepped over to Rohan's side. This is bigger than our castle, Rowan said, her voice low. That was the only way to put it. The expanse of Strixhaven was bigger than all 5 castles on Eldraine put together. At the center of it, the enormous building rose above the rest. Sunlight glinted on its pointed arches, while large orbs floated over the shorter buildings. That's the Bilboplex, Charisma said, coming to stand next to them. Will nodded absently, still speechless as he gazed over the campus. Rowan let out a short laugh, jolting him from his retrieve. This is going to be good. Will smiled as he followed his sister towards the looming gates. They were massive enough to seem closed, even though it would probably take them another hour of walking to arrive. He's only taken a few steps when he abruptly realized Charisma wasn't following them. He and Rowan turned and looked back curiously. Aren't you coming? Oh no, Charisma said, shaking her head. She looked at her owl, and the bird took off, flying towards the Bilboplex. I have other matters to attend to. Look for an owlin named Marvdinia Sharpbeak. She will help you get settled in. Oh, Rowan cleared her throat. Well, thanks then. Will bowed. What what my sister said. Thank you for bringing us here. No need for such formality, Charisma said, smiling. but you are most welcome." Will straightened up and glanced at the woman once more before joining his sister, Rowan. He whispered, "What do you think of this owlin? What do you think an owlin is?" On the other side of the gates, the campus bustled with activity as people hurled along wide stone paths of Strixhaven. Some of the younger students wore identical uniforms, their gray cloaks fluttered behind them as they hurled along. The older ones were each garbled in unique outfits and moved in groups like colors staying together. Red and blue ruffles and frills stood in stark contrast with the angles and swirls of the black and white coats and spars. Green and black overcoats and heavy boots seemed to complete opposite of the elegant narrow red and white waistcoats and high collars. Will turned to his heels, taking in the kaleidoscope of moving colors and shapes. "She's strange, isn't she?" said Rowan abstainedly. She didn't seem nearly as bowled over by the spectacle all around them. If anything, she seemed lost in thought. "Who?" "Charisma. Her and that owl," she struggled. "I guess it doesn't matter any more. She got us here, right?" Before Will could form a response, shouts rang out from further inside the campus. In an instant, Rowan was off running towards the voices. "Hey!" called Will, Sterling staring after her. "Way up!" They raced around the corner only to skid to a stop at the entrance to a smaller courtyard inside. A crowd watched as two groups of students flung spells across grassy field, the bolts of light and color spurling through the air as they narrowly missed their targets. One spell impacted a girl in red and blue as she started to float, kicking her legs helplessly and waving her arms. Laughter and applause rose up from the crowd. Will stared in horror. "I thought this was supposed to be a school. This is brilliant," Rowan finished, grinning. She tucked on the sleeve of the nearby student, the young dryad in black and green. "Who's winning?" "So far, Prismari seem to have the advantage," said the student. "But I wouldn't get too comfortable if I were them. Those silver quills can be vicious lot. Bloodthirsty battling in the middle of campus?" sprawled Will. The dryad frowned. "It's it's it is just a duel. No one actually is going to get hurt. Not too badly, anyway." "Okay, enough of this," said Will, trying to sound forceful. "Rowan, come on. We need to speak to, well, some kind of administrator, a schoolmaster perhaps. There are classes to join and surely books we need to acquire." And Rowan stepped forward, ignoring him completely. Out of the field, a student had fixed his eyes on one of the Prismari in red and blue. His hands were raised, and his hips moved as he spoke in a low, focused tone. Between his fingers and curls of black ink began to form. "Watch out!" shouted Rowan. She set a jolt of electricity at one preparing the ink spell. He yelped as it zapped him, causing the black ink he was conjuring to splash all around his uniform. More laughter and applause from the crowd. The Prismari student turned and looked at Rowan, surprised. "Thanks!" Rowan grinned and started to respond before Will could warn her. A coil of light living ink swept her feet out of from under her. She landed on her back, coughing as the air rushed out of her chest. For a moment, and peered up to see who had hit her. A student in black and white robes, same as the one she shocked. "Stay out of this, first year," hissed the student. The air around Rowan snapped and crackled with electricity as she called up another charge. "Want to try that again?" Back on the sidelines, the dryad leaned over to Will. "So that's your sister?" "I'm afraid so," he said, grimacing. He had been hoping for quiet for learning so far. This was just as bad as Kayam. Looks like she's chosen her house. It was true. Rowan was standing on the side of the Prismari student now, hurling sparks across at the others. Reluctantly, Will stepped into the field, picking his way through the battle, dodging gouts of flame and arrows of light as they flew back and forth. When he finally managed to reach her, he grabbed her arm. Rowan, this isn't our fight. Let's go. She just laughed. Will, you're just you you had some you have some fun if you actually tried it. We're not here to have fun, Rowan. We're here to become better mages. Stand aside, first year, came the shout from behind him. He turned just in time to catch an orb of ink in the chest, which exploded and sent him crashing into Rowan. Together, they picked up themselves off the ground, coughing, and Will looked down in horror. The copy of the Memoirs of Thaddeus that he had in his travel bag has fallen out and was dripping with black ink. He knew at once that it was ruined. Okay, Will groaned, clenching his jaw. Maybe it is our fight. Rowan tugged him to his feet. Remember, the match is against Virtus and Grom. Will nodded and called up the energy to cast magic. Instantly, the air around him dropped several degrees as he let out a breath, which fogged into the air. Let's do this. Rowan turned and lifted her hand, calling forth a spear of lightning that popped and sizzled as it stretched and snared into the air. Well counted as he sent a wave of cold wind and the ice to swirl around Rowan's lightning. 1, 2, 3! Will and Rowan moved as one, their magic combined as it arced towards the other students. They didn't seem to be grinning too smugly anymore, but just before it hit the silver quills, Rowan lightning flared and snapped, cutting through the ribbon of Will's ice magic. Will frowned, but it was too late to adjust. Rowan's attack was strong at least. It pierced the shield of light the older Silverquill student had conjured, sending her stumbling backwards. Rowan wobbled next to him, but the celebration was short-lived as she spun and used a lash of lightning to knock away the other magic's barbs. Will stared at the spot where their combined magic, the interweaving of spells they had always been able to do, had failed. Something wasn't right. Liliana stood outside the Bilboplex, watching the bright parade of students as they passed. She could almost feel the weight of her old weather-bloom uniform and pulled abruptly at the collar of her professor's coat. Across the way, Dean strutted through the Bilboplex doors with Dean leisurely next to them. Liliana fell onto step alongside the deans. Professor Onyx, Dean Listry nodded in greeting. How are you setting in with your classes? Just fine, Liliana said. I thought I've been hearing some disturbing rumors from the students. Dean Nastri laughed. It was an odd sound from an effect, like water streaming over crystals. Well, young minds are not are wont to create elaborate tales. I think it's a good sign. Active imaginations and all that. Liliana forced a smile, trying to keep her tone light. Unless they are also playing dress up and skulking through the halls, I would say this is a little more than innocent play. Stalking? Dean Leslie arched a brow. And you seen one of these people? She paused. How to answer this? I saw a stranger in a mask on campus. Whatever this was one of these quills. However, that word again. It always sounds so serious. We really don't know if these rumors are more than just a harmless prank, said Dean. That magic the masked stranger had slung at her was far from harmless prank. We shouldn't underestimate them. In any case, the other deans and professors should be warned. Surely the school has some line of defense that we could employ. You mean the other than Al Alibu? Alibu? Dean Nisri huffed. I'm sure he would love to actually have something to do for a change. Maybe then he'll let go of his grudge against me. I was thinking something more than a single golem. Even if these, whatever you call them, do present some risk, other students are hardly helpless lambs, says Leslie. They can defend themselves. But who is going to protect them from each other? Says Nesri. Glancing at nearby courtyard, Liliana could see the elegant errant spells sailing into the sky as cheering and shouting filled the air. Another duel, Leslie sighed, while Nisri laughed. See? With such talent, I don't think they'll have anything to fear from the quill. Or I. Oh, Nesri, Dean Nesri, started started Liliana. We should really fine together. They moved to break up the battle. Nisri sent a wide swath of water through the crowd, correlating Personari students. Vines and roots spouted forth from the ground under Dean Leslie's command, pulling children away from each other and binding their hands before they could send any more magic flying. A young boy grumbled as he followed a blonde girl off the field. This isn't Kalim, Rowan. Liliana frowned. Her gaze swept over their clothes. They were out of uniform, and swords hung from their belts. His short hair was just as bright as hers. Their eyes and noses mirrored each other. Kalium, he said. She knew of a place called Kalium, but it wasn't located on Archivos. The girl frowned. I know that well, but this isn't Eldraine, neither, and you can't tell me what to do. Can we please just go before we get into trouble? Liliana watched as the twins passed her, briefly mentioning the boy's gaze. He shot her a nervous smile, then hurled past through his sister along with them. They probably weren't Quarry agents, but they seem but if if they were planeswalkers, then maybe they could be useful if when she corrected herself troubled arrived at Strixhaven. Will marveled at the walls inside of the students' dormitories. Entering lines raced through the stone, glowing with a soft light. He reached out and traced one of them, the magic tingling against his fingertips. This is it, Rowan said from down the hall. She waved Will over before pushing in the door. Going in after her, Will took in the study walls and the glass window. Sunlight seemed in, filling the space with a warm glow. Two beds stood on either side of the room, each neatly made with gray blankets covered in intersecting golden lines. On the wall behind her, two uniforms hung on racks, matching shoes sitting on the floor beneath them. Rowan dropped onto the bed closest to the door. This is nice. Much better than those rocks they called beds in Kelium. Will chuckled as he set his books down on the other bed. He sat down, sinking into the plush mattress, and ran his fingers along the gleaming stitches. The same glowing lines flowed across the stone wall, carved symbols nestled in the corners, stone, flames, and the trees and stars matching along the ceiling. His attention snagged on the flames, reminding him of the fierce duel outside. He looked down at his hands. Did that spell we cast together seem off to you? Rowan looked over from the other bed. What do you mean? I don't know. It's what it's just wasn't the same as on Kellium. Well, we're not on Kellium, remember? Rowan struggled and panted her feet on the blanket. Besides, it worked, didn't it? What what's the big deal? Will shook his head. Yes, it worked, but it should have been smoother, more coerced. We've done spells together dozens of times, but this time it was as if our magic wasn't cooperating. I wonder if the Bilboplex will have some answers. Well, if you have fun with all that reading, Rowan said. She pulled herself up and heading towards the door. This isn't my problem, Rowan, protested Will. What if being on this world is doing something to affect our magic? My magic was just fine. No, it wasn't. Will stepped towards his sister. But here we could figure out why. You heard Charisma. This is the most extended collection of magical knowledge in the multiverse. We didn't come here to get in some stupid school feud. Rowan rolled her eyes. Oh, really? And what did we come here for? To learn, to get stronger, to take advantage of the knowledge and wisdom that Strixhaven has to offer. Will dropped his hands to his side. We could take all of that back to Eldraine and help our own people. Rowan only shook her head. That's what you came here for? But I'm not you. We may be twins, but I'm not but I'm allowed to live my own life. Of course you are, Will sighed. That's not what I meant. After a moment, Rowan turned and left. Will grabbed his books and hurled after her, but as Rowan moved further down the hall, Will stepped slowed. Maybe he would have to find answers on his own. On the bench along a scenic campus courtyard, Charisma watched her owl returning from the dormitories. She could see the twins in her mind, their image a bit warped from the shape of those Evalian eyes. Strixhaven would offer many possibilities for them. She just needed to see which one they would take. Something was pulled at her attention, and Charisma closed her eyes. But instead of darkness, her mind filled with red. Another of her owls flew through the air, soaring over the rocky desert. Movement below staggered her gaze. A man climbed the rocks, the red and brown of his clothes helping him blend into the landscape. Beside him, a fox-like creature leapt nimbly up the side of the bound formation, only to suddenly stop and drop into the defensive stance. There was a rush of the air as several figures seemed to slide from the shadows, stepping out of the surrounding messes at impossible angles. They were dressed in dark clothes, metal masks hovering where their faces should be, a sickly purple light cloistered in each of their raised hands, all of which were pointed at the man with the fox sting. Slowly he raised his hands in surrender. Charisma sent a mental command, and her owl followed high overhead as the mages bound the man's arms and dragged him towards a yawning cave mouth, waiting ahead. Lukka grunted as the mages shoved him into the cave. Mila prowled at his side, her teeth bared and hackles raised. Silently he raced out through their link to soothe her. If she attacked, the mages would think he was an enemy, and while he was sure he'd win the fight, that wasn't what he had come here for. Milla looked up at him, then slowly settled back into the wornness. She kept in step with Lukka, stepped over a aged, moldering books that spilled all over from the bare shackles along the wall. The mages brought him into a large chamber. Stalactites and stalactites cut through the space like jagged teeth, and the ceiling bathed in shadow. Lukka stumbled on a loose stone, setting a small shower of pebbles skidding down the slope behind him. "Quiet!" one of the masked mages hissed at him. He shoved at Lukka's shoulder. "Keep moving." Lukka held his breath, trying to smother his own annoyance. Then one of the stalactites moved. At first he thought he was imagining things, the darkness playing tricks with his mind. Then Lukka, excited, extended his senses and froze. The pebbly, rugged texture wasn't stone, but some kind of shell. Slowly, whatever it was seemed to unfold, stretching long and spindly legs into the darkness behind him. Another stalactite shifted in place, making a slow, chattering sound. As it did, they were surrounded. "Keep moving," said the masked mage. They picked their way through the space, every skittering stone sending their gazes up to the ceiling. Lukka tried to envision what the creatures looked like when they were active. The thought of facing one of them in the flesh brought back memories of many crawling nightmares that lured in the cave system under Ikoria. Accompanying the horror, though it was oddly familiar, he couldn't help but to feel as thought he had encountered their kind before. The major yanked Lukka for a stop, forcing him to his knees. Milla turned towards the far side of the cabin, dropping low with a snarl. Lukka glanced down at her. "Hey, quiet." The clutching bones punched through the silence. Footsteps approached. As one of out of the shadows came a tall, thin figure, swirling around the long, almost bird-like mask, hiding his face. His face were currents of darkness coursing energy. Lukka tried to keep his own expression neutral as the man approached one of the creatures hanging from the ceiling, pausing to caress its shell. Welcome to Avictos, Lukka of Ikoria. You know me? I know many things. Things that I could teach you." The masked man stepped away from the strange creature towards Lukka. "And, in exchange, I believe there are things you could do for me." And that's the end of episode 1. So, we end off the first episode with Rowan and Will arriving at Strixhaven, while Liliana, who's Professor Onyx, we don't know why Liliana is here. I guess she just wants a break from all the Gatewatch craziness that she went through with War of the Spark. And we also get the return of Lukka from Ikoria. And we're probably probably the one in the bird mask is probably the one responsible that corrupted the Osalith back in Ikoria. Because Lukka did say that this magic was familiar, so I guess we're gonna find out who is also the mastermind for who was trying to cause all that chaos from Ikoria a year back. So we'll have to find out who this mysterious man is in the next chapter. So until then, this is your humble host, Josh24214, and let me know, do you want me to continue the story of Strixhaven or make this like a one-time thing? Let me know in the comments below, and if it's good enough, we'll continue the story of Strixhaven. So until then, bye for now.